Today we're going to begin learning a Sicha by the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Parshas Vaera. Be'ezer Hashem, we're going to continue it in the next class as well. This is a talk, an address, a shir that the Rebbe presented during the Farbrengen of Shabbos, Parshas Vaera, Tovshin Lamed Aleph. That's Shabbos Vaera, 1971. 1971. That's 50 years ago. Tovshin Lamed Beis is 50 years ago, so this is Tovshin Lamed Aleph, 51 years ago. And it's published in Likkutei Sichos, volume 16, Parshas Vaera. If you open your source sheets, you could see the text inside. It begins on page 47 in the Likkutei Sichos, and in the source sheets it's in Yiddish. But as usual, I will translate and try to elucidate to the best of my ability, Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach. Before we begin, I'm going to share a story. And the reason I'm sharing this story is, not just to begin with a story, which is nice, but the reason is because this story is going to be explored in this shir, in this Sicha of the Rebbe. The story is going to be explored in great detail and depth. So therefore, I want to first share the story as an opening, as an introduction. And it's generally a story that's meaningful, it has a lot of layers of meaning, and it's significant. The story was written up in a letter. If you could put yourself on mute, there's somebody here. If you could just put yourself on mute, it'll just be easier, please, if you don't mind. Thank you. Thank you. This is a letter that was written by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's known as the Rebbe Rayatz, the Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch, who passed away in 1950, the Rebbe's father-in-law. He passed away Yud Shvat, Tovshin Yud, 1950. And he wrote this letter, and it's published in the back of the Nusach Chabad, in the back of the Chabad Sidurim, Siddur Tehillas Hashem. They have a Kovetz Mechtavim, a bundle of letters by the Rebbe Rayatz about saying Tehillim. Thank you. And over there, this letter is printed. And I want to share with you the story that the Rebbe shares, the Rebbe Rayatz shares. He writes in this letter, it's obvious, it's clear, that simple Jews here mean earnest, genuine Jews who have pure faith, and they say Tehillim with sincerity. They participate and come to hear the shiurim, the classes of learning Torah. Together with friends, they fulfill the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael with love and with joy. They are the shashuyim of Gan Eden. Shashuyim means they are the pleasure and the delight of souls in paradise. And the greatest tzaddikim, the greatest rebbes, feel so much pride when looking at them. The Baal Shem Tov, the holy Baal Shem Tov, had a custom. He was makarev. He was very close. He used to bring close, and he showed a lot of affection to Jews that you would call simple Jews who feared God, and he loved them dearly. And everybody knew about this passion of his, this lifestyle of his. In fact, this was one of the biggest reasons that the circle of the Baal Shem Tov expanded among the masses in such a short time. How did the Baal Shem Tov have such success? As we know many stories about this. So one of the real reasons was because of his kinship, his closeness to all types of Jews. But he had some great Talmidim, students, who were tzaddikim, who were ga'onim, they were great scholars, and their holy mind couldn't easily digest this. And even though the Baal Shem Tov sent them many times to learn various aspects of life about sincerity, bitochen, emunah pshuta, emunas chacham, emunas tzaddikim, avos Yisrael, to learn about sincerity, about trust, about simple faith, believe in the sages, believe in tzaddikim, love of Jews from simple people. They couldn't digest this type of behavior, especially that they should also do it. Even the Baal Shem Tov doing it was difficult for them, but for them to do it was even more difficult. And the reason is because there was just this attitude, like there still is, holier than thou. You have here a Jew who's so simple and not very learned and seemingly illiterate and uneducated. And the Baal Shem Tov had such a passion for them and such a feeling of closeness to them. There was a custom by the Baal Shem Tov that the guests that used to come to him would eat at his table during 2 meals of the 3 meals of Shabbos. Because one meal was designated only for his closest students, known as the Vaera Kadisha, the holy group. And then other guests didn't have the permission to attend, not even stand from a distance. So the guests that used to come would spend 2 meals of the Shabbos meals with the Baal Shem Tov. It was a summer Shabbos, and something happened, and it startled, it overwhelmed, it shook up all of the students of the Baal Shem Tov and his Vaera Kadisha, his holy inner circle, which was comprised of extraordinary minds and great Gaonim, the students of the Baal Shem Tov, people like the Maggid of Mezrich, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, Pinchas of Koritz. The Baal Shem Tov had 60 Talmidim, many of them were they were called Vaera Kadisha, and some of them were chief rabbis of large cities, large towns, large communities. So this happened on a Shabbos-dik summer day. It was Shabbos, and many guests came for Shabbos, including simple Jews. Jews who owned inns, motels, Jews who worked the land, farmers, Jews who were laborers. You had tailors, you had shoemakers, you had farmers, those who planted vineyards and other orchards. You had people who raised cattle and people who raised birds. You had merchants in the marketplaces, vendors, and similar types of Jews. That Shabbos, it was Friday night, and the Baal Shem Tov displayed enormous love and affection to the simple guests who have come, called simple, sincere Jews. In fact, one of them, he gave his own cup. There was the wine that was left over from Kiddush, and he gave it to one of them, which was a tremendous thing. The second one, he gave his cup to use for Kiddush. Some of them, he shared with them parts of the challah on which he made hamaitzi. To others, he gave pieces of the fish and the meat that was in his plate, and other kiruvim, other forms of closeness that really startled the Vaera Kadisha, the inner holy circle of the Baal Shem Tov, tremendously. These guests who have arrived for Shabbos, knowing that for the second meal, Shabbos morning, they have no permission to go into the meal of the Baal Shem Tov because this was designated only for his closest students, the Vaera Kadisha. So after they ate Shabbos meal on their own, wherever they ate, they came to the shul of the Baal Shem Tov, and since they were very simple Jews, they were not scholars, they were not literate, they were not educated. You had many Jews like that. All they can do is read Hebrew. They read Ivra, so they could read Chumash, they could read Tehillim. That's what they can do. They couldn't learn Mishnayos and learn Gemara and learn Mefarshim, Rishayim, Achrayim. It was beyond them. So every one of them, after the meal, came back to shul and they started to say Tehillim. This story happened in the years Tovkuf Yud Gimel through Tovkuf Tesvav. That would be 1753, between 1753 and 1755. That's 5 years before the Baal Shem Tov's passing. Passed away 1760. During that time, the Baal Shem Tov had students who were geniuses, who were great spiritual minds and giants. For example, the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Pulna, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, and many others. As the Baal Shem Tov sat down to the second meal of Shabbos morning after davening, he organized his students, the holy group, each person in his place. There was a certain structure the Baal Shem Tov had. The Baal Shem Tov was a very, very organized person. And when they started to sit, they sat for a while, the Baal Shem Tov started to teach Torah. And his students melted away in divine ecstasy. There was a divine pleasure that overtook them hearing the Baal Shem Tov's Torah. The system was that at these meals they would sing zmiras, they would sing various songs and nigunim. And when the holy group, the students, saw that the Baal Shem Tov spirit was elated, So they themselves were so overjoyed and they were so overtaken by simcha and by ecstasy. Their heart felt so good and they were so filled with gratitude to Hashem for all the goodness and the kindness that God gave them. And the most important thing is that they had the Sichos to be at the feet of the Baal Shem Tov, to be a student of the Kedosh Hashem, of the Baal Shem Tov. May his soul rest in peace, Neshmas Yedin. So you have to understand, when they saw the Baal Shem Tov in such an elevated space, he himself was in a state of joy. It inspired them. They themselves felt so lucky, so grateful to Hashem. Some of the students felt that now is a good time because now they have the Baal Shem Tov themselves. At the other meals, you have a lot of simple Jews who are fine people, but they don't really understand anything. They have no depth. They're not educated. They don't really get it. They don't understand the go'iness, the brilliance, the intricacies, the depth. Baal Shem Tov was besides everything else, the Baal Shem Tov was a genius in Torah. People don't know this. The Baal Shem Tov had students who were go'inei yoel. They didn't come there for the fish and the herring, and because the Baal Shem Tov smiled to them. You're talking about people who were masters of Kabbalah, of Nigla, of Halach, of Shas, of Poskim. I told you that chief rabbis of Chaim Rappaport told us, you had a lot of people there were go'inei yoel. So they said, the other meals you have there, chevra, they're there for the, they're there for the warmth, but they don't really get it. Now it's good. Now they felt much better. And they were thinking to themselves, they didn't say it, but they were thinking to themselves, why does the Baal Shem Tov spend so much time displaying so much kiruv, so much love to these simple Jews? In fact, he's sharing with them his own wine from his own cup. He's giving his own goblet, which he never did, to one of these simple Jews. As they're thinking about this, a few of the students, as they're thinking about this, suddenly they see the face of the Baal Shem Tov becomes very serious. He goes into a dveikus, he goes into a very deep trance. And in that trance, he starts talking. And this is what he says. These are the words of the Baal Shem Tov. These are his words. The pasuk says, Shalom, Shalom, la'rachik v'la'karev. Peace, peace to the distant and to the close. So Chazal say, la'rachik, it should have said to the close and to the distant. So Chazal say it's la'rachik shenasa karev. It's to those who are distant who then become close. Because the place where Baalei Tshuva, returnees stand, even complete tzaddikim cannot stand there. And the Baal Shem Tov explained what they meant by complete tzaddikim. And he says that there are two paths in serving Hashem. There's the path of the tzaddik and the path of the Baal Tshuva. The tzaddik is the righteous, holy Jew, and the Baal Tshuva is the Jew who struggles and returns to Judaism. And the Baal Shem Tov explained that the work of the simple Jews who come here is like the Baal Tshuva. They are on the spiritual level of the Baal Tshuva because they always have a sense of humility. They have this inner deep sense of vulnerability and surrender. Just like a Baal Tshuva who has remorse for the past and feels the need to change himself or herself for the future. These Jews, even though they were, so to speak, FFBs, they grew up as religious Jews, but because of their simplicity, they have this inner sense of remorse, of humility, always working on themselves, never feeling completely content and satisfied. As the Baal Shem Tov finished teaching this, they began singing various songs. And the students who in the beginning were thinking about the fact that it's strange that the Baal Shem Tov shows so much love to these simple Jews, understood that the Baal Shem Tov felt what they were thinking, and therefore he said what he said, and he explained the tremendous maila, the tremendous virtue of the service of Hashem of these simple Jews, that it's similar to the Baalei Tshuva who exceed the tzaddikim. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov was telling them that these Jews, their service of God is sometimes much greater than your own. The Baal Shem Tov at that point was in tremendous dveikus. He was in a tremendously deep meditative state. When they finished singing, he opened his holy eyes. He gazed at the faces of his students for a long time and very deeply. And then he asked that each one of his students places his right hand on the shoulder of the friend sitting near him, so that all of the students sitting around the table were now interlocked with each other. Because everybody's hand was on the shoulder of the person sitting near him. The Baal Shem Tov was sitting at the head of the table. He asked them to sing a few songs as they were sitting like this with their hands interlaced, interlocked with each other. When they finished singing, he told them that they should close their eyes and should not open their eyes until he does not instruct them to open their eyes. And then he took his two holy hands and he placed his right arm on the shoulder of the student sitting on his right, and he placed his left arm on the shoulder of the student sitting on his left. Suddenly, all of the students heard a sound of music that was filled with sweetness and pleasantness and delight, with a sense of yearning and aspirations that shakes up a soul. Suddenly they hear one person singing and saying, Oy ribono shalolam, Imres Hashem Amaris Tahiris Kesef Tzarir Ba'alul La'aretz Mezukak Shivasayim. This is a verse from Tehillim, how Hashem's words are so pure like refined silver and completely purified of all toxicity. Another one is singing, Ayri Boine Shalaylam B'chaneni Hashem V'naseini Tzar F'chilyoyse V'libi. Clean out my kidneys and my heart. Again from Tehillim. Another one sings, Tata Hartziker. My father, my heart, my dear, beloved, heartfelt father. Chaneni Elakim Chaneni Ki B'cha Chasaya Nafshi V'tzel Knofecha Echsa Ad Yaver Havois. Find refuge for my soul. I want to dwell in the shadow of your wings until the turmoil passes. Another one sings, I Gewalt Zisse Vater in Himmel, Yakim Elakim Yafutzu Oiva V'Yenusim Asanav Mipanov. Gewalt, my sweet Father in heaven, let all of the enemies run and flee from our presence. Another one screams out in a deep emotional voice, Tayere Tata, precious Father, Gam Tzipor Matzavayis, Udror Kainla, Sheshas Efreches Bezbechaisecha Hashem Tzvayis Malki Velakai. Again, another capital in Tehillim speaking about that even a bird finds a nest where she could dwell. And another one cries out, Liber Fater the bottom de Ketata Shuvenu Elakei Yeshenu V'Afrikas Cheimenu. My beloved Father, my compassionate Father, bring us back and remove all wrath from us. The holy students hear the music and the sound of the Tehillim. They themselves are trembling, and even though their eyes are closed, floods of tears are flowing down from their eyes on their cheeks, and their heart feels so much humility from this sound of ecstasy coming from the people saying Tehillim, and each one of the students is hoping and blessing themselves that they should have the merit to serve Hashem with this type of passion and unwavering sincerity and profound connection. The Baal Shem Tov removed his holy hands from the shoulders of the two students that were sitting on his right and on his left. And as he removed his hands, suddenly there was silence. They couldn't hear anymore what they heard a few moments ago. These Jews saying Tehillim. The Baal Shem Tov told them to open their eyes and to sing some songs which he told them to sing. The Mezritcha Magid Reb Doiv Ber was there. He repeated the story to the Alter Rebbe, to his student, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya. And he told him, when I had that vision and I heard those Jews saying Tehillim, I had shvichas hanefesh, my soul poured out to God, and I had deep ga'guyim, deep yearnings. I felt an ecstatic love which I never experienced before. My slippers, my pantofel, my sandals were soaking from sweat and tears of tshuva that came from the deepest part of my heart. When the Baal Shem Tov finished singing, everybody was quiet. The Baal Shem Tov remained in tremendous dveikus, tremendous ecstasy for a while. He opened his eyes. And then he said, the voices of Tehillim that you heard is coming from the simple Jews who are now saying Tehillim with simple faith, but from the deepest parts of their sincere heart. You, my dear students, holy Jews, look at you. Look at you. Even you and us, we don't have access to the full truth. We only have access to sfas emes, to the tip of truth, because we know that our body can delude us. Our body doesn't always give us the truth. Our soul always knows the truth, but we don't have access to the full truth. And our soul is part of the whole truth. That's why it's called the tip of truth. Still, we recognize the truth, we feel the truth, and we get emotional from the truth. Certainly Hashem, who is all about truth, he knows the truth about the Tehillim of these Jews. You just got a little glimpse into the truth, and you're still so moved. You understand how Hashem is moved? The Alter Rebbe told over the story to his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. He told him that the Maggid of Mizrich shared with him the story, and he told him that afterwards he was in such pain and remorse that he had such thoughts about his Rebbe, feeling that the Baal Shem Tov is wasting his time and energy in displaying such love to these Jews. And the Maggid did a few tikkunim, he did a few things to fix this thing, but he could not relax himself, he could not forgive himself that he was questioning his Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov. One night, the Maggid says, I had a vision. The Alter Rebbe did not share with the Tzemach Tzedek what the vision is. What the vision is. Initially, the Alter Rebbe did not share with the Tzemach Tzedek. You know when he shared it with him? A week before his passing. In other words, this week. The Alter Rebbe passed away, Chavdala Tevis, Tov Kofayin Gimel. The 24th of Tevis, Mitzvah Shabbos, 10:30, 1812. Mitzvah Shabbos Shmois, Chavdala Tevis was Sunday, Shabbos was Chav Gimel. That week before his passing, he was running away from Napoleon, he was in the Ukraine, he was staying in a little town called Piena. They buried him in Hadich, not too far. The week before his passing, he finally shared with him what the vision was. He wanted the Tzemach Tzedek to know. And the Maggid said as follows. It was one night and I had a vision. I was walking in the chambers of Gan Eden. I was walking in the Heichalos, the spiritual sanctuaries and chambers of paradise. I was returning. He went one way and then he was returning. And I passed one chamber where there were children sitting and learning Chumash, and Moshe was sitting at the head table. So what's happening in Gan Eden? In Gan Eden, all the souls are learning Torah for thousands of years. He says there was one chamber, children are sitting, and Moshe is teaching them Torah. All the children were learning Parshas Lech Lecha. One of the children was saying the Chumash loud. This is the vision that the Maggid is having. He tells this to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe tells it to Tzemach Tzedek a few days before he passes away. The first part of the story the Alter Rebbe shared earlier, but this vision only right before he passed. And the Maggid is watching this. He's having this experience of the children learning Chumash with Moshe. And one of the children is reading loud Parshas Lech Lecha. And there's a pasuk by Yipol Avraham al panav Yitzchak. When Hashem promises Avraham to have a child, Avraham falls on his face and he starts laughing. And he says, a person who's 100 years old is going to father a baby, and Sarah who's 90 years old is going to mother a baby. And Moshe Rabbeinu tells the children that all of the commentaries in Chumash are emes. There's a lot of different ways of explaining it. For example, this pasuk by Yitzchak, you could say he was joyous, v'chadi, but other midrashim say no, he was laughing, like cynical. And the Maggid and Moshe Rabbeinu said, and no pasuk should be taken out of its literal interpretation. You're going to ask a question. How can Avraham Avinu doubt what Hashem said? He's laughing? How can he doubt it? So you should know, said Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm quoting now, Asher zeh mitzad haguf, v'asher gam guf kadosh basarhu. Sometimes we have experiences because of our body, because even the holiest body is still made of flesh. This is what Moshe is explaining to the children. In other words, what Moshe is explaining is doesn't take away from the holiness of Avraham Avinu. Sometimes our body responds to certain things that we hear or that we see, and we have to appreciate it. We have to respect the fact that our body is made of flesh, even though it's a holy body, it's a sacred body. But because the body has its own reality, its own chemistry, it responds to certain realities, and it doesn't mean it's going to become the defining trajectory of our life. So at that moment, Avraham Avinu's body responded with laughter. Said the Alter Rebbe to the Tzemach Tzedek, my teacher, the Maggid, told me, when I heard from Moshe Rabbeinu, that because of one's physical body, you can have thoughts that are just natural. They come into you. They are bodily thoughts and bodily sensations. The Maggid of Mizrich relaxed. He was beating himself up for the fact that he was questioning the Baal Shem Tov, and he was thinking that the Baal Shem Tov is really squandering his holy time, and he couldn't figure out and wrap his brain around what the Baal Shem Tov was doing until that Shabbos at the meal, when the Baal Shem Tov put his hands on the shoulders of his students, and he showed them that vision of the Tehillim in the shul that was happening right then during lunch, during Shabbos lunch. But now that the Maggid learned this concept from Moshe Rabbeinu in Gan Eden, and what was the concept? That sometimes your body just responds. It's not the end of the world. You don't have to worship it, but that's what it is. My body responds with a certain emotion, with a certain sensation, with a certain angst, with a certain experience, with a certain feeling, with a certain thought. Avraham Avinu laughed, so the Maggid felt much better. The Tzemach Tzedek shared this story with the next generation, and that's how the Rebbe Rayatz knew the story. So this is a direct story in the Chabad dynasty that the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, heard from his father, heard from his father, heard from his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, who heard from his grandfather, who heard it from the Maggid, who was right there by the Baal Shem Tov, by the story. And the Rebbe concludes the letter. Obviously, from then to now, a lot of things have changed. And even though the path of Chassidus has expanded, but still we do know that our minds are smaller today, and our hearts are smaller today, both in understanding and both in our ability to transform our hearts. But the pure faith and the beloved sincerity, with the kindness of Hashem and the Sichos of our fathers, the holy Rebbes, still have the same power and vigor to give us life, tremendous internal life in Torah, in mitzvahs, and in acquisition of good midos. This is the story. It's a very, very deep story on many, many levels. It's so deep because, and it fits into, we learned last week about the donkey. You remember the donkey of Moshe Rabbeinu, the donkey of Avraham, the donkey of Mashiach, donkey, chamor, chaimer, working with the body, 3 levels. We spoke in Chayes Sarah about Hashem telling Avraham, whatever Sarah tells you, you have to listen to her. So here we have another dimension of a teaching of Moshe Rabbeinu that the Maggid heard during a night's vision. I'm sharing with you this story because it's a story. It's a powerful story about sincerity, about emunah, about simplicity, about people, great people, who often have this feeling of, why should I hang out with you? How could we compare ourselves to each other? I'm in a completely different state. You're in a completely different state. And how the Baal Shem Tov really had to heal his students and inculcate within them a larger, deeper, more divine, more authentic perspective. There's so many amazing aspects to this story. Another aspect is how small our vision is. The Baal Shem Tov closed their eyes, and as they closed their eyes, they actually could start seeing. As they connected to each other with their arms on the shoulders in the presence of the Baal Shem Tov, they saw things, they heard things. After that, they didn't. Our scope of vision is limited. But here, we come now to the Sikha, and we're just going to begin today. And as we'll see, this story is going to occupy an important feature in this Sikha of the Rebbe that was said in 1971, Tov Shalom at Aleph. And that's why I wanted to share this story first as an introduction. Because in this week's Parsha, and the end of Shmos and Vaera, we come across another story about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu complains to God and feels that Hashem, Kevayachal, is not doing the right thing. Right? How does Parsha Shmos end? You remember? Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Paro. He tries to convince him to let the Jewish people go. And what happens? Paro increases the burden of labor on the Jews. The subjugation and enslavement and tyranny only increases to the point that the policemen who were appointed by the Egyptians to oversee the Jewish people, and they were beaten because they didn't have the heart to demand from the Israelites the quota of work that was required by Pharaoh. They were beaten. They came to Moshe and they said, God should judge you because of what you have done. You made Paro more angry at us. You made Paro feel that we smell. You made us stink. Those are the words in the eyes of Paro, and now he's really going to kill us. And that's when Moshe can't hold back. And he comes to Hashem and he says, why have you afflicted this people? And why did you send me to go liberate them? And since I came to Paro to speak in your name, not only did you not save this people, it became much worse. And how does Parsha Shmos end? Hashem says, Atatira, now you're going to see what I'm going to do to Paro. He will ultimately expel you from his land with a strong arm. And that's how Shmos ends. And how does Vaera begin? Hashem speaks to Moshe and he says, Am Hashem, I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with the name Shin Daled Yud. I did not make my name Yud Kei Vav Kei known to them. I made a covenant with them, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to give them the land. I made this covenant with them. And now you could tell the Jewish people, you're going to find out that I am God and I'm going to take you out from this country and ultimately I'm going to bring you to Eretz Yisrael. Now the structure here of the verses is very, very complicated. I hope you learn Chumash, you learn Parshas HaShavua. If not, you should start. It's important because you look at the end of Shmos and then there's a new Parsha. Hashem continues the conversation but with a new opening. It's extremely unclear. But Moshe Rabbeinu here challenges Hashem in a very real way. He says, why have you afflicted the Jewish people? And as we'll see, this is where this story of Moshe and Avraham Avinu and the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov come in. And again, we know the story from the Tzemach Tzedek, who heard it from the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, the week before he passed away. It would be interesting to note why the Alter Rebbe felt that he could not tell him about this vision all the days of his life until the last week. I don't know the answer for that, but something maybe to think about. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know that we'll be able to understand that. If somebody has an interesting insight, I would love to hear. Okay. So let's learn. Let's begin. Vaera Aleph. We spoke many times as Rash is l'chayleresh mefarish pshuta mikra and halt sein pirush euch in yanim mefloim and shar chalki ha-Torah und euch yana shel Torah nor b'chtei aretz zu nehmen din yanim b'shar chalki ha-Torah darf man frier ableinen pirush Rashi al derech hapshat. Rashi, Rabbeinu Shlomo Yitzchaki, who lived in the 11th century in France, in Germany as well, but primarily in France, in Troy. His purpose is to explain the literal meaning of the Torah. Nonetheless, as the Shalah writes, his commentary contains inyanim mufloyim. Inyanim mufloyim means wondrous, deep ideas in other parts of Torah. And the Alter Rebbe once said that Rashi on Chumash has the wine of Torah, which is the inner secrets of Torah. But in order to extract these gems from Rashi, you first have to learn Rashi from a literal perspective. In other words, you can't right away jump into the higher, deeper layers of Rashi's commentary. First, you have to cover the pshat. This is it. First, you have to know the pshat well, thoroughly. And then you can extract the higher layers, because if not, you're not going to get it. In other words, the vista to the mystical is through the simple. Nachdem wie Rashi is mefarish den Pirush HaPashat von the Psukim in Anfang von der Sedra. Ve'eid el Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov v'gam HaKimoisi is Rashi mamshich v'Rabbi Seinu darshu der Teuchen von der Psukim le'inyan shal Maila she'amar Moshe lo maharei Yisa amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu chaval al da'avdim v'lo mishtakchin yesh li lis'oinin al misas ha'avos harbe pam nigleis yaleim mikel shadav v'le'amr li mashmecha v'ato amarta mashmoy ma'omer aleim וגם הקימויסי כשביקש אברהם לקבר אסור לו מוצא קרקע שקנה בדם מרובים וכן ביצחק עירו לו ולבייס של חפרה וכן ביעקב להירח מדויסי ואתה אמרת למה רייסו is Messiah אין המדרש מסיישב אחר המקרה חולי. Okay, let me explain what the Rebbe is saying, because you have to get this, because if not, you're not going to understand the whole Sicha. Just want to get a Chumash, give me a moment. Very briefly, and please tune into this so you get it the first time. At the end of Parsha Shmos, as I just said, Moshe returns to Hashem and he challenges Hashem. Why have you afflicted the people and you made things worse? How does Parsha Shmos end? The last pasuk begins chapter 6 of Exodus. Hashem tells Moshe, now you're going to see what I'm going to do to Paro. He's going to send you out from Egypt with a strong arm and he's going to expel you from the land. Now you see. Okay, great. Let's learn the Rashi. Now you're going to see. And Rashi says as follows, listen to this. Hashem told Moshe, Hirhartal midaisai. You questioned me. You challenged me. You really feel that I'm doing something wrong. You're not like Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, I told him that Yitzchak is going to father a nation. Then I told him, offer him as an offering. And he didn't question me. He didn't have second thoughts about my midos. He didn't think I was wrong. I'm making a mistake. I don't know what I'm doing. You're not like Avraham Avinu. And therefore Hashem told him, Atatira. Now you're going to see what's going to happen to Parai. Ultimately, you will not be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. Ata, now you're going to see. This is what Rashi says at the end of Parsha Shmos. Now you're going to see what Parai does. So yes, it's going to work out now, but it's going to be for you now because the next conquest in Eretz Yisrael where we defeat the 7 nations, that you're not going to see. That's the end of Parsha Shmos. You would think the conversation is over, right? Moshe challenged Hashem. Hashem responded, you're going to see now, it's going to work out. Parshas Vaera, this is where it's strange. There's a whole new story. Hashem speaks to Moshe, and he has this long conversation, one of the longest. And he says, by the way, I'm God. Okay. I appeared to Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, the name of Shindalad Yud. Excuse me. I made a covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan. Now I have heard the outcry of the Jewish people, and I remember my covenant, and therefore tell them that I'm going to liberate them. And that's the continuation. So Rashi tries to understand what is the sequence, what is Hashem telling him. So after he gives the literal interpretation of these psukim, that basically Hashem says, I promised and I promised and I promised, but I never executed and fulfilled my promises, which is represented by the name Yudke Vavke, that I'm loyal and I am believable, I execute, I don't only promise. Now I'm going to do it. But then Rashi, Perik Vav Pasuk Tes, gives a whole other way of learning these psukim. And the point is, he says, Rabbi Seinu Darshu, our rabbis explained that really Hashem is responding to what Moshe said earlier. Why have you afflicted us? And Hashem said, Chaval al da'abdin. I miss those who are gone and they're not here anymore. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I truly lament and grieve for the death of the others because I revealed myself to them many times with the name Shindalad Yud. They never asked me, what's my name? You, when I introduced myself to you, you said, what's your name? What should I tell them? Number one. That's number one, he says. They never asked me what's my name. You wanted to know what's my name. That's one complaint I have. That's why I grieve their death. Next, Avraham Avinu wanted to bury his wife Sarah. He had to pay a lot of money. Yitzchak undug wells and they attacked him. They stole the wells from him. Yaakov had to buy a piece of field by Shechem. They should have all asked, why do I have to spend so much money? You promised us the land, but they didn't. They accepted me, and you didn't. You asked, why did I afflict you? And Rashi says that this medrash does not work with the literal interpretation of the psukim. And he gives a whole reason why this medrash does not work in the literal interpretation, even though he brings it. Okay. You could look up the Rashi. It's a very interesting, one of the longest Rashis, Perik Vav Pasuk Tes. Says the Rebbe in Soif Parsha Shmos in Pasuk Atatira. Was ist der Entfer von HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kasav af lama reisa? Sagt Rashi hier, hartal midaisai. Loi ka Avraham, shamarti loi kibitze gekara lechazara. V'achan kach amarti loi halei loi, lo v'lehir racha midaisai. At the end of Shmos, as I just quoted, where Moshe says, why have you afflicted the people? And Hashem responds, and his response is, you're going to see what's going to happen now. So Rashi says, you have questioned me, you think I'm making a mistake. Not like Avraham, who accepted me, even after I told him that Yitzchak will father a nation. I told him to bring him as an offering, and he did not have second thoughts about my midos and think that I made an error. So that's what Rashi said at the end of Shmos. And therefore, now you're going to see what's going to happen to Paro. You will not go into Eretz Yisrael. Darf man verstehen. But this is difficult to understand. Aleph. Favos in Parshas Vaera in Pirush von Rabbi Seinu Darshu Hanal. bringt Rashi von Rabbi Seinu Araya as alle Avis lo hidiru acher midoisai. Und in Sof Parsha Shmois bringt Araya nor von Avraham. Wow. You see the problem. At the end of Shmois, when Hashem tells Moshe, you're not like Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu didn't question me. Avraham Avinu didn't have his doubts that I'm making a mistake. You did. In Parshas Vaera, Rashi brings the same theme, contrasting Moshe from the patriarchs. But in Shmois, he only brings a proof from Avraham Avinu. Here in the beginning of Vaera, he also brings from Yitzchak and Yaakov. What happened? Beis. Euch benegei Avraham Gufa, is it Rashi Parshas Seinu mefarish the minion from Lehiru Rachem Edoisi mit anander Me'ura. Kshabikash Avraham likber Asara, vi in Sof Parshas Shmois, Shamarta lekibitz gar lechazara. Even with Avraham, he chooses a different story. At the end of Shmois, he chooses the story of the Akedah. I promised Avraham that Yitzchak is going to father a nation. There are going to be children that come from Yitzchak. And then I told him to offer Yitzchak as an offering. That was the issue that Avraham was challenged with. And nonetheless, he accepted it in good faith. In Parshas Vaera, Rashi brings a whole different story. That when Avraham wanted to bury Sarah, he had to purchase the land of the Machpelah for a lot of money. Why does he change the story? Gimel, Ve'ikir. B'soif Parsha Shmois bringt Rashi den Pirush Lehiru Stam, das heißt, als ein Pirush, Pshutish Shal Mikra. Maschegen bei Parsha Seinu, mit der Haschale, für Rabbi Seinu Darshu. Adrash, wie Yisayrim ist, als Adrash, welche sich nicht Messiashu Acher HaMikra. Heipach Klal B'Rashi, wenn bringt an Agadah, das ist Meshach, the HaMikra. The biggest question, at the end of Shmois, Rashi says it as the literal interpretation of the Psukim. Hashem says, now you're going to see, he was basically chastising Moshe Rabbeinu for second-guessing him, unlike Avram. Here, Rashi says, Rabbi Seinu Darshu. It's not the literal interpretation. It's a special drash from the rabbis, and Rashi actually rejects it, which is also a chiddush, that he brings it and he rejects it, because usually Rashi only brings a medrash if it gives us an understanding in the words of the pasuk. Here he quotes it and then he rejects it. And at the end of Parshas Shmois, he says it as the literal interpretation of the Psukim. Beis v'yesh loymar, as the letzte diuk verentfert kol hanal. In Sof Parshas Shmois is Rashi mefarish pshuta shel mikra al asar. Ukipshuta is the pasuk vayemen Hashem al Moshe atatira an entfer kanal if Tyrus Moshe the Psukim lifnei zalam arei zalam azah umi az basi el paraladaber b'shmecha heda lam azah. Nicht nur hat der Schliches von Eberste nicht gepeilt, der Hatzalle von den Jiden, hat sie loyezahlt aus Hamecha, nur Adrabe, Heide lo Amaza. Und der Fahr Atatire, ha-Ossi le Paratire, weil ha-Ossi le Malchi Shuve Umes, wie bald er seit Mahane gewinn Achem Idoisei. Nicht wie der Anhoge darf sein, und es gewinn bin Niden Däume bei Avraham, was loyhirer Achem Idoisei, Hagamas frier amartele kibitze gekarel chazar wacker amartele alei leile was der Haftoch hat geirem gewen wie in unser Fall at Zar Neusef al derech me aus basle da beschmeche hele geimer wie me zet bemuchisch ad der Zar von nit haben kein Kinder is nit bedeumen zu die Yesuden was man hat wenn der Reberstadt schon gebencht mit haben jachend ul eise knasse und wird noch zugenommen und befragt nach as der Tat allein darf es tun. Wow. The Rebbe says the last question, he asked a few questions, right? He asked 3 questions. The last question gives us the opening to understand it. At the end of Shmois, Rashi is trying to explain the meaning of the verse right there, the literal meaning. Moshe says, Lama Arei, why are you doing this? Hashem says, now you're going to see what I do to Parai. What's the response? What's the response? So Rashi explains the response. Moshe told Hashem, why have you done this to the Jewish people? And since I came to speak in your name, it got worse. He wasn't just asking, why are you torturing them? He wasn't saying only that my mission was unsuccessful. I haven't saved the people. He was saying something much deeper than that. It became worse. This was his lamentation. It wasn't just, why do you do this? Why are you putting them through the ringer? And nothing helped. No, it's worse. You send me to go redeem them and it becomes worse. Don't send me. Don't send me. You send me to liberate them. In other words, there's already optimism. There's good faith. There's joy. Jews are hopeful. And because I went, it became worse. If I wouldn't have gone, Pari wouldn't have gotten angry. He wouldn't have increased the slave labor. Because I went, it became worse. That was his taina. Not only did my shlichus not affect the salvation of the Jewish people, my shlichus to Pare made things worse. And Hashem responds to Moshe and says, you're not like Avraham Avinu. Which story of Avraham Avinu does he choose? So Rashi has to find a story that reflects the similar circumstances which Moshe Rabbeinu was bringing to the table. What were the circumstances? That as a result of God's promise, of God's mission, things got worse. That's the contrast. If he brings another story, it wouldn't be a contrast with what Moshe was saying. Moshe wasn't just questioning why Hashem allows suffering in the world. He was questioning something even more. You already send me. You tell me things are good. And because I go believing things are good, it becomes worse. Right? That's like an extra stab, an extra sting. So where is there an example for this by Avraham Avinu and his reaction? Hashem told Avraham Avinu, Ki b'Yitzchak yikara l'chazara. He promised him, you're going to have a son Yitzchak, and this Yitzchak, after he was born, he told him, he's going to father the Jewish nation. And then you tell him, then I tell him, then Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, bring him as an offering. The promise of Hashem caused an extra pain. Just like by Moshe Rabbeinu. By sending him, it became worse. By giving this promise to Avraham Avinu, the pain became so much more difficult. As the Rebbe says, you see practically, there is pain of a parent, not of a father or mother not having a child. But you can't compare it to the pain of somebody that Hashem blessed them with a child, an only child, and when they were old, and then he gets taken away. Especially when the father himself has to sacrifice the child. That pain is so much more devastating. You didn't promise a child, It's painful. But now you promised. And not only you promised, you deliver it. There's a child. And you said this child can be this child is going to be the father. It's not just a child for a few years. It's a child that's going to last, that's going to live for eternity. A whole nation is going to be built from this child. And then it's taken away. So here it's your promise and your commitment and your actions that made the Akedah so much worse. That's what Rashi brings at the end of Shmos, because that's the contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu's behavior. And what is Hashem saying? And still Avraham Avinu understood that he doesn't have to wrap his brain around my behavior. He can trust me. He doesn't have to second guess me. He doesn't have to think I don't know what I'm doing. I made mistakes. You're not like that. That's why Rashi contrasts the two. And therefore, Atatira, now you'll see what's going to happen. You're not going to go into Eretz Yisrael. So we understand why Rashi can't bring the other examples of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with buying the Maris HaMachpelah, with having issues with the wells that the Philistines are taking away, with Yaakov Avinu being forced to buy property in Eretz Yisrael. Over there, the challenge was not that as a result of Hashem's promise, things got worse. Over there was a general challenge that life was filled with struggle. Al Pisa zeich moven es hat nit kein Ort, as Rashi soll bringen der Eier Avram lehirach midoisai. Von dem was geschabikisch lik bei der Sarle Matze Kark. Wir gehen bei Yitzchak in Ruala, wir gehen bei Yaakov in as Chalkas Hasada. Warum dort is nit gewinnen an Neufen as der Haftache Gufelasses Lemes Eretz hat Geidem gewinn as al kaufen the Karke bedammen berubim. In those cases, Avraham Avinu had to buy a plot for his wife for a lot of money. Yitzchak had to fight for his wells in Eretz Yisrael, the Plishtim. Yaakov had to buy a field also for a lot of money. And they didn't second guess Hashem. They didn't say, you promised us Eretz Yisrael. So why am I buying the Maris Machpelah for a lot of money? Right, but over there, it's not that Hashem's promise caused more problems. It's not like if Hashem wouldn't have promised them, they would get it for cheap. Because Hashem promised them Eretz Yisrael, therefore Ephraim decided to charge Avram a lot of money. It's not like Yitzchak had issues with the wells because God promised them Eretz Yisrael. It's not that the God promise made it worse. Der Hider hat noch gekannt sein, als haben die gedacht, doch, von der Sinne sonnet, hat es Avram nicht gedacht, kosten kein Sachgeld. Al derech zeh bei Yitzchak ve Yaakov. Und b'meile is hiru nit kein Dugme mechuvenet zu dem, was Moshe hat maharer gewen. Ad der Eberste Schliches Guf hat geirem gewen the matzah von Edelam Hazeh. So therefore Rashi doesn't bring it, because over there, what the others might have thought is, not that God's promise made it worse, but Hashem promised me that He's going to give me a land. Why do I have to pay so much money for the Maris HaMachpelah? Why do I have to fight for my wells? Why do I have to pay such an exuberant sum for the piece of land in Shechem? So even if they would have such second thoughts on God and question Him and challenge Him and feel that something is wrong, it wouldn't be parallel to what Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking, to what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. What Moshe was saying is that God's mission itself caused the disaster. If Hashem wouldn't have sent him, the situation was dire, was bad enough. But there was some comfort zone. There was something, they were accustomed to it. But because Hashem sent him, Pare got enraged, Pare got infuriated, he made things much worse. This was Moshe's challenge. He doesn't just tell Hashem Lama Reyose, he says, May us basil Pare l'davar b'shmecha heira la'am hazeh. Your mission itself made it worse. It's not like, okay, Pare would have made it worse anyway. No, he made it worse because Moshe came in his shlichus. So Moshe is like, what's happening here? You know, the Jews are suffering, and now you send me to help and to liberate them and emancipate them. And what happens? Because you sent me, it got worse. So here the contrast can't be to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov buying the property. Because over there, the divine promise didn't make things worse. They would have anyway had to pay a lot of money for the real estate. It happened to be, they could have been upset with God. The right example, the right contrast is only the story of the Akedah. Because here, it's Hashem's promise, Ki b'Yitzchak hakara l'chazara, that really caused so much more pain. If he didn't promise, he didn't promise. A person doesn't have a child, they don't have a child. But Hashem's promise, you're going to have a child, and He delivers on it, and then He promises that what? That this child is going to live for eternity because he's going to build generations of offspring. So the hopes are so high, the joy is so deep, and then you take it away. You yourself made it so much more painful, made the Akedah so much more painful. And nonetheless, Avraham Avinu can accept it. He doesn't understand. He doesn't have to understand God. That's the contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why at the end of Shmois, Rashi only brings the story of Avraham and he brings the story of the Akedah. Aber loi dem was Rabbi Seinu darshuhu, as the ganze Teuchen haksuvim. Euch ve'edel Avraham Yitzchak vel Yaakov kommt behemshich le'inyan shel Meila. Und is a tale von dem Eberstens meine benegede Scheiles und de Burim Virhurim von Moshe Bechlal. Nicht mit Zadatzar Neusev Dafke. Was haben sich angegeben von Vaata, Marta, Mashma, Ma'oimer Aleim, ist moving von was bringt, Rashi bringt Droshes Razal und von alle drei Oves, als alle Loi Hidiru Bechlal Achemidoisai. In Parashas Vaera, where Rashi is saying that our Rebbes saw that all these psukim, all the psukim in the beginning of the Eira, their entire theme, not just the last pasuk of Shmois, which is a direct response to Lamarayos, but also the entire continuation of the narrative of Parashas Vaera, where Hashem speaks how I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, all of them. It's all a continuation to Hashem's response to the fact that Moshe questioned God's behavior. It's part of Inyan Shel Maila. It's a continuation to the theme at the end of Shmois, not just a separate story, but it's part of God's response to all the questions of Moshe, to Moshe's words, to Moshe second guessing and thinking what Hashem does. And not just Moshe complaining about this one aspect that Hashem's mission caused things to get worse, but just the general question of why things are so bad and why did He put the Jews into this position. And that already began, not at the end of Shmois, it began already as Hashem said, when you start asking me, what's my name? Like you're really challenging me. So here, Rashi, as a drasha, he brings the fact that all the Avos did not question God. All the Avos accepted God on good faith. So here he brings Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, it says Ve'edel Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And here it's not just about that it got worse. It's just the general thing of having the ability to say, I don't understand. And that's fine. And he says in 21 that this would explain why Rashi even brings this whole drush, even though he himself rejects it. And if you're rejecting it, why are you bringing it? He says, because according to the first explanation, it would be difficult to understand. Why didn't Hashem chastise Moshe for saying, what's your name? What am I going to tell them? What's your name? So Rashi brings the second interpretation that according to the Rebbes, he did chastise him. After he said, Lama Reyosi, he mentioned that detail as well. He goes into all the details in footnote number 21. You could look it up. You could say one more thing. Das, was Moshe Rabbeinu hat gesagt, Lama Reyosi, Lama Zeh, ist doch nicht an Inyan Prati, was es benegeht zu ihm allein. Nor bescheiches la'am hazet zu Klal Yisrael. Aber Mele kann Rashi in derech Hapshat nicht bringen a Dugme von Avraham, was hat nicht Maharer gewinnt, benegeh der Maris HaMachpelah. Und al derech ze von Yitzchak bei der Be'eres, und von Jakob bei Yikenes Chalkes Asada, warum das alle seinen Inyanim, was seinen Gewinne gehe sehr allein als a Prat. Und der Ribber käme Mechalig sein als der Pfarr, haben sie nicht Maharer gewinnt, was sie ihm getracht, als bei sie ist der Aftache nicht Mekoim geworden, der Pfarr, was Gott amachet. Wie Rashi hat schon früher Mefarisch gewinnt bei Yankovin. Maschenken, Taines Moshe, was ist gewähnt, benegeh Ras Klal Yisrael. Kann doch nicht sein, als Chet Moshe soll gehören sein Arei Salam Azah. Und der Rebbe bringt Rashi al Pipshute in Seif Parsha Shmois, Leuk Avram Shamayt Lekibisa Karol Chazara Vaka Chamayt Lei Alei Ulayla, weil euch da ist es gewähnt, negeh nicht Mois zu Avram in allein, nur Lehemshach Kol Adeires Acharav. Aber Meile ist euch dann nicht Shaykh dich Shash, Shem Agara Machet. Va'afal Pekin is Lei Hirirache Medoisai. Maschenke bei Yitzchak wie Jakob, was bei sie gefindt man nicht, als a Passierung war Hage. Wow. There's another aspect, another explanation. When Moshe challenges Hashem and says, why are you doing this? Why have you so afflicted the Jewish people? He's not complaining about a personal, painful experience in his life. He's talking about the nation, Klal Yisrael. He himself actually didn't have to work. He grew up in the palace, then he escaped to Midian. He was a refugee. And even when he came back, the tribe of Levi didn't have slave labor. This was not a personal issue with Moshe. Even though he was part of the nation and he suffered and his family suffered and his friends suffered and his relatives suffered. But he was complaining, he was crying out about the people. Lama Reyosi, Lama Zeh. So now when Hashem is contrasting Moshe to the Avos, Rashi can't give an example that Avraham Avinu didn't question God about the fact that he had to pay for the Maris HaMachpelah. Or Yitzchak didn't question Hashem about the fact that he had to quarrel and fight for his wells. And Yaakov didn't question Hashem for the fact that he had to buy and purchase a field in Shechem in order to live there, to dwell there for an exuberant price. You can't compare. These were all things that affected them as individuals. So yeah, they didn't complain, they didn't challenge God because they understood. Hashem promised them to give them Eretz Yisrael, but a lot of things can happen. Rashi said before, there's a concept called Shema Garam Hachet. Sometimes there's a promise, but sometimes as a result of my behaviors, I'm undeserving to experience the actualization of this promise. So they could have all thought, okay, Hashem has his calculations with me, and for whatever reason, the promise wasn't fulfilled. Rashi himself said this by Yaakov. Why was Yaakov afraid when Esav was coming with 400 people? Hashem told him, I'm going to be with you. So Rashi says in Vayishlach, he thought, Shema Garam Hachet. Maybe I've made mistakes and errors that ultimately ruin things for me. So therefore I can understand that the Avos didn't question Hashem. But Moshe can't blame himself for his own sins because he wasn't complaining about himself. This wasn't about his own well-being. He was crying out for the suffering of Klal Yisrael. So Rashi can't say that Hashem contrasted it with the Avos who didn't challenge God about their own personal, painful moments when they had to pay a lot of money for the Maris HaMachpelah. And I should also add, and the pain of paying a lot of money can't be compared to the pain of Galus Mitzrayim. The pain of losing wells is not the same pain like Galus Mitzrayim. So it was also much less pain, but it was also personal. So they could find reasons why God did not fulfill the promise of giving them Eretz Yisrael during their times. But Moshe Rabbeinu, he's not crying about himself. He's crying for his people. So that's why Rashi at the end of Parsha Shmois can bring the stories of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that he brings later in Vaera. It's not going to work. In the previous Siv, the Rebbe gave an answer because Moshe's complaint was that it got worse. So he had to find that in Avraham Avinu. But here he's saying something else. Hashem had to find something that was similar, and therefore he compares it to Avraham Avinu with the Akedah. Because when Hashem told him to take Yitzchak to the Akedah, this wasn't something that would cause Avram pain as an individual. This would eliminate the future of the Jewish people. If Yitzchak would have been sacrificed, there would have been no Jew. There would have been no Jew alive. In other words, Avraham Avinu was sacrificing not only his own life, not only his own happiness, his own joy, his own nachas, he was sacrificing the future of all the generations. So you can't say, oh, because of my sin, God's promise wasn't fulfilled. This is not just affecting me, it's affecting the Jewish people for eternity that will never emerge. Still, he can accept Hashem. He didn't feel the need to think that God made mistakes. He can accept it. By Yitzchak and Yaakov, we don't find such a story ever. That's why at the end of Shmos he has to bring this story of Avraham Avinu, because this is the only appropriate contrast to Moshe. Moshe was not thinking about himself, Moshe was thinking about the people. And he was questioning God, what are you doing? Lama reis lama zah. Hashem says, Avraham was not that way. It was also not a personal thing, the Akedah. It wasn't only about him. It was also about him, but it wasn't only about him. He couldn't say over there, okay, maybe my own mistakes, maybe my own sins didn't allow me to experience the joy of Yitzchak. For whatever reason. He couldn't say that because it's not only affecting him, it's affecting eternity. So he could have said, wait, there's no excuse for this, God. There's no excuse. But he understood Hashem's infinity cannot be grasped by my brain. So that's why in Parsha Shmos, Rashi's example is meticulous. Dasals is mitzad pshuta shel mikra. Aber Leute, aber seinu darshu al pi medrash, agadar shebetoira. Welches verbunden mit Nishmasa der Reise, der Reif Sedes HaTeire Gnuzim Ba, ist doch Ha'avas Heinen am Merkava. Als euch Lamata Neulam Hazazen sehen der Darge von Merkava wie Lamaylam. Ist Lefiza bei See bechlall nicht scheich zu sagen, der Minion von der Slachlachti begeht. Und der Ribber kämen bringen, als Lehiru Achamidoisai, euch von den Jahren, was Lecheire seinen See praten, welche seinen Scheich zu sehr als Prat, Maras Amachbele bei Avraham, bei Yitzchak in Jena Be'eres, bei Yaakov Yiken as Chalkes Hasada, wie bald sie seinen Gewinn Merkava Rakle Ratzen Alien Kal Yemei. From a literal perspective in Chumash, this is clear, and that's why in Shmos, Rashi has to give that one example from Avraham with the Akedah. In Parshas Vaera, he introduces Rabbi Seinu Darshu. He's introducing Medrash. He's introducing Agada. Agada is the homiletical perspective of Torah, which is part of what's known in Zohar as the soul of Torah. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that most secrets of Torah are embedded and hidden in Agadata, in Medrashim, in the stories in Gemara, in the homiletical interpretations. So Drash is already a deeper spiritual layer of Torah, and there the Avos are called Merkava. Merkava means they are a chariot of God. Even down here, they are like a Merkava. Merkava were like the angels who are the chariots of God. There's no sin, there's no corruption. Their entire entity is just a manifestation of God. So on that level, you can't say about the Avos, they became soiled by sin. The Avos are a Merkava. They're a conduit for Hashem. As it says in Tanya chapter 23, he brings in 28, footnote 28. All their limbs were sacred and completely aligned with the Ribbono Shel Olam all the days of their life. That's what a Merkava means. A Merkava means like a chariot, which is just a channel, just like a chariot or a car or a horse, a wagon. It's just there to facilitate and bring you from one place to another place. The Avos were the manifestation of the divine light in this world. So when Rashi brings Medrash, here you can't say that the Avos became soiled through sin. It's a deeper layer of understanding them. So therefore, even individual pain in their life, like Avraham Avinu having to pay so much money for the plot for Sarah, and Yitzchak to fight for his wells, and Yaakov to purchase his field. The fact that they did not question God, they accepted it with grace. They understood that they don't understand. They understood that it's okay not to be okay with Hashem because you don't have to understand. You can trust. This can also be introduced here. You say it was individual issues. And with individual issues, they could say, oh, maybe my sin affected it. So how could you compare it to Moshe, who wasn't asking for himself, he was asking for the Jewish people, so his sin couldn't affect the pain of all the Jewish people? The answer to that is, on a deeper level of Medrash, the Avos are beyond sin. So they can't justify it that way. So how could they justify it? They have to just accept God. So therefore it could be introduced as a contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu. Because since their entire entity, they're a merkava, a chariot for the will of Hashem all the days of their life. So therefore when this happens to them, they can't attribute it to their own sins. So how did they accept it? They accepted it because they understood that they don't have to understand. Now you'll ask in 24, why couldn't Moshe say the same thing? Maybe the sin of the Jewish people caused that it shouldn't happen. Maybe not his own sin. But here we're talking pshat. And Rashi himself says in Shmois Perik Beis Pasuk Yudala that that's a medrash, that Moshe felt that the sins of the Jewish people may be preventing redemption. Especially later in Shmois, Hashem tells him, go back to Mitzrayim because all the people who want to kill you have died. Who are these people? The people is those who gossiped and slandered to Paro about Moshe Rabbeinu, and they're gone. So therefore these sins are also gone. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't have a justification, their sins are preventing the Geula. So therefore you can't al pi pshat contrast him to the others besides Avraham Avinu when it came to the Akedah. So this is the first part of the Sikha that deals with explaining Rashi on a literal level. Very, very big question. I hope you understood. It's not, you have to hold cup here. If you didn't understand, learn it again. One second. Huh? So this concludes the first half of the Sikha that deals with the literal understanding of this tremendous contradiction in Rashi, where at the end of Shmois, he sees Hashem lamenting and contrasting Moshe to Avraham Avinu about one particular incident. Moshe complaining about Mitzrayim and Avraham not complaining about the Akedah. In Parshas Vaera, suddenly Rashi brings the same lamentation of Hashem, but here he's quoting stories of all the Avos, and even with Avraham, a different story. At the end of Shmois, it's Pshat. In Parshas Vaera, it's Medrash that he rejects. So the Rebbe gave two different ways of understanding this contrast in Rashi. One is that at the end of Shmois, he's talking about Moshe's complaint, not only that things are bad, but that things became worse because of the divine intervention. The divine intervention made it kavayachal worse. And the contrast for that would only be the Akedah, not the other stories. Where in the Parshas Vaera, Rashi can introduce also all of the stories of the Avos, because there is the general concept that Moshe is second-guessing God, not just that things got worse. And then in Siv Gimel, the second explanation in Rashi, that Avraham and Moshe are not experiencing personal pain. It's something that affects the Jewish people, and therefore there's an appropriate contrast, where in Parshas Vaera, where he brings Medrash, he introduces all of the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because the fact that they're not second-guessing God, even when it comes to individual aspects of their life, is an appropriate contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu, because you're talking about people who are complete conduits for Hashem's will, and therefore even their individual experiences as a merkava, they're not going to say there is sin over here, and still they accept it, the Rebbeinu Shalom. Now he goes to the deeper layer of Rashi, which is going to introduce the story of the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov that we spoke a few minutes ago. And this we're going to continue 7:30 Thursday morning, Be'ezer Hashem Bli Neder. I'm going to take some questions. Before I take the questions, I want to remind you that tonight, 10 o'clock, there's going to be a Zoom with myself and Rabbi Sheis Taub. It's in tribute to Rabbi Yoel Khan. And it's going to be about learning and teaching Tanya in our times. That's 10 o'clock p.m. It's going to be on the yeshiva.net or on the Zoom. But you have to have the special Zoom link. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 12:45 p.m., we have the women's class. It's going to be live streamed. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, in Muncie, in person, there's going to be a Yiddish Shir and Fabrengen in honor of the Yortzeit of the Balatanya in the Vision. It's on Maple. Thursday morning, 7:30. Let's take some questions. Okay, question. A lot of questions. Okay, number one. I'm waiting here for the deeper meaning. This sounds so familiar, appreciating the previous generations over the current one. Can this be coming from Hashem too? I need the deeper meaning here. Okay, we still have to get to the second half of the Sikha. Next question. But Rabbi, can we say that the Israelites in Egypt paid off with their pain and slavery, which is much more than the money Avraham, Isaac, and Jacob paid in money? And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was so agitated because Hashem was so much more harsh with them. You can't compare it to what the Avos went through. Right, exactly. That's what I mentioned this. The Moshe was such a deep pain. The Avos didn't have such deep pain besides the Akedah. The Akedah, he was losing his son. And that's not just losing his son. It's losing his only son from Sarah, and it's losing the entire future of the Jewish people. That was exactly my question. Hard to understand how Moshe was wrong. Avraham was letting go of his own shattered dreams, but Moshe was advocating on behalf of the people. It wasn't about him. Isn't that the job of a Jewish leader? Wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu right to complain? It wasn't about his personal issue that God did for him. He was advocating on behalf of the Jewish people. Great question, great question. I just want to emphasize that Avraham Avinu was also, because when Avraham Avinu didn't complain, but he could have, because this was not just on behalf of him. This is on behalf of the Jewish people that would never come into existence because Yitzchak would be slaughtered, and that day would be the death of the Jewish people. So this wasn't just a personal issue, this was something that affected the future of Klal Yisrael. But you're asking, shouldn't a Jewish leader complain? So we're going to get more into this, but generally on the most simple level, what Rashi is teaching us here, based on the sages, is that Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu that Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu and Yaakov Avinu all went through difficulties in their life. But they understood that they don't understand me. They understood that they don't have to wrap their brains around Hashem. They didn't second guess me and think I made an error. They had this trust that God knows what he's doing, and this was their challenge to Moshe Rabbeinu, even though Moshe was speaking from deep pain and deep anguish. More about this later. Next question. With Avraham Avinu, the nation was only a theory, it was only a promise. With Moshe, it was like the parent who already had the child. Maybe Moshe was right to have a different reaction than Avraham Avinu. Good question, excellent question. You're saying that by Moshe it was much worse, because the people in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, they left Egypt 600,000 between 20 and 60, were suffering so badly. With Avraham Avinu, he would lose this one child with Akedah. With Moshe Rabbeinu, it was so many children that were lost. And it wasn't just the future in potentiality, but it was already the present. So Avraham Avinu would also lose a child that was already there. It's not just a child in theory. Avraham Avinu didn't have a child in theory. At that Akedah, he had a child. Yitzchak was alive, and he would have lost him. So that's beyond painful. And he would do it himself. As the Sichos points out, he himself would do it. But you're saying still Moshe Rabbeinu was dealing with so many more people. But I don't know if one can compare the pain of Avraham Avinu to actually sacrifice himself. Moshe Rabbeinu is not killing the Jews. Pare is killing the Jews. Avraham Avinu was told that he himself has to slaughter and sacrifice the child that was already around. So that's a pretty profound thing. You're saying still Moshe Rabbeinu is dealing with a whole nation, so therefore his reaction is perhaps different. But nonetheless, the Akedah does have very striking similarities. Without the interpretation of Chassidus, so many of these parenting techniques from Hashem were handed down generation to generation at face value. And I don't think they're always so beneficial for the Jewish people, such as, here is a statement, why can't you be like? Why can't you be like? And I don't think that's helpful for children. Why can't you be like? And I think here too, we need a deeper interpretation of what is going on. Okay, point well taken. We're not done yet. Where is the Zoom link for the Monday evening shir on Tanya? So sign up to our WhatsApp and you'll get all the Zoom links. If you go to theyeshiva.net, there's contact us or sign up to our newsletter, and over there sign up to the WhatsApp, and you'll get each time there's a class, you'll get the Zoom link. Say that. I'll also ask them to put it on the item on the yeshiva.net. So if you go to the yeshiva.net where it's going to be aired, they're going to put in the comments the Zoom link, so you'll be able to find it there as well. Okay, next question. Does this not understanding and trusting everything work the same between people and conflicts and relationships? If yes, how do you advise it's possible to attain for the human brain, which needs clarity and understanding? And how can we get the special Zoom link for tonight? Okay, again, the Zoom link, sign up to our WhatsApp. If you go to theyeshiva.net, join our newsletter, you could sign up, you'll get it. If not, come to theyeshiva.net and they'll have the Zoom on the page. So before the event, I'll tell them to put the Zoom on the page in the comments, so you'll be able to link and go onto the Zoom. There'll also be live questions tonight. When do you say we should try to understand, and when should we not try to understand? And how does this work in relationships? Okay, great question. I think it works in relationships also in a very profound way, because even though our spouse is not God and should not be considered God, nonetheless, I think there's a concept where I have to respect your experience, even if I don't fully understand it, and that's fine. It's called respect, respecting the space of another person, and really tuning into where they are. And I may understand it, I may not understand it. So I think there's a certain element where I could appreciate the fact that I don't understand it, and I don't have to. I don't have to wrap my brain to understand your moods and your emotions and everything that you're going through. I can just be there. I can be present for it. Obviously, in the case of God, that presence means knowing that there's a plan that's beyond me. And there's a mystery here that I don't fathom. And that's fine. But I think in all relationships, we need an aspect of that. Now, when should we try to understand things? When we could understand things. When something is given to us to understand, we should try to understand it. Our brains are blessings. Our brains are tools to be used constantly. Our brains should not be squandered and wasted, and our brains are not negative. We cherish wisdom and we cherish understanding. But there comes moments in life when we can't wrap our brain around reality. Most of reality we can't wrap our brain around. You know, I spoke yesterday, we had a shir, the revolution of the Alter Rebbe in Oirein Seif, Basi Lagani 5722, number 2. If you have a chance, try to learn it. It's very powerful. The revolution of the Alter Rebbe about Oirein Seif, the light of infinity. It's on the yeshiva.net. Basi Lagani, 1962, class number 2. So he spoke about the fact that most of, light is what allows us to know the universe. But most of the universe is invisible because we don't have the vessels to be able to experience that type of light. So most of reality, we can't wrap our brain around. We can't see it. So I have to have the awe and the respect and the knowledge that I don't have to have the knowledge. I'm okay that I'm not okay, that I don't get it. It doesn't fit into my box, doesn't fit into my brain. It still may hurt, but I don't have to grasp it. And even if I don't grasp it, I can be fully present in that moment, in that relationship. Whatever I could understand, I want to understand. This is probably what I have learned most from all of our classes. To understand that we don't understand, and to understand that we don't have to understand. It's ironic, but it's true. To really understand that you don't have to understand, and really understand it, and be fine with it. The way I understand it is that trusting is much more important than anything else. Maybe we can't understand Hashem. Maybe we can't always understand our spouse, but we can trust them. That's beautiful. Torah we do understand. Pain we don't. Why? Well, even Torah, there's a lot of Torah we don't understand, trust me. Torah is infinity. So there's certain aspects that God allows our brain to grasp, but the Torah has layers of infinite depth. That's why Moshe is in Gan Eden for 3,000 years and he's still learning. He's not bored. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the Tanoim, the Amirim, what are they doing for thousands of years? They're learning Torah because it's infinite, it's godly. The divine is infinite, Torah is infinite. And pain comes from the place of infinity. That's why we don't understand it. Look in Tanya chapter 26, Alma de Iskasya. The motto is let go and let God. Let go and let God. Sometimes I feel it's the opposite. We do understand pain. We don't understand Torah. Okay, you see? Different people experience different things. What he meant was that we don't understand pain in the sense that we don't understand the reason for so much of the pain that we or people experience. Beautiful questions, my dear friends. Beautiful questions. Okay, so again, if you go to the yeshiva.net and you go to the live bar and you go to tonight's event, a little later they're going to have in the comments the link to the Zoom. So even if you don't have WhatsApp, you'll be able to find it. I wish you all a beautiful day, sending love and blessings to each and every one of you. May you have an uplifting, inspiring, meaningful day filled with joy, sincerity, earnestness, authenticity, and trust. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This is called the Pittsburgh March. Rabbi Twersky would sing this Shabbos Musaf when he davened in the Pittsburgh shul. Rabbi Avraham Yoshua Heschel Twersky, Dr. Twersky.